Bienvenida a todos, alumnos, profesores, darles la bienvenida también a este segundo semestre, ya con más aprendizaje. Un primer semestre nos encontró sobre la marcha con una crisis sanitaria, ya más acostumbrados supongo, no con tantas ganas de seguir acostumbrándose. Espero se encuentren bien, que podamos volver pronto a la escuela. Creo importante recuperar la presencialidad de nuestras funciones, pero de momento vale más cuidarse. Bueno, quisiera darles las gracias a todos los presentes por acompañarnos. Tengo el agrado de presentarles esta primera charla del semestre junto a Scott Steffes. Él es arquitecto por la Universidad Estatal de IOWA. Ha trabajado ocupando importantes cargos para prestigiosas oficinas de arquitectura norteamericanas, como son KPF, Nueva York, SOM, Chicago, dentro de las cuales ha participado en el diseño de más de 40 proyectos en alrededor de 30 ciudades del mundo. Actualmente vive y trabaja en Chicago como director de proyectos para Wight and Company. Bueno, él me ha comentado que quiere presentarse personalmente y darles más detalle, así que en breve los dejaré con él. Les comento, mi función aquí será moderar esta charla, ser el puente de idioma entre español e inglés. Scott ha sido muy amable en colaborar con esta idea de charla, con intervenciones puntuales de mi parte, ya que entendemos como escuela no todos pueden comprender inglés en su totalidad. Y bueno, con el inglés que me manejo, me podré defender y contribuir a que podamos entender en casi la totalidad esta charla. Al final vamos a tener un tiempo para algunas preguntas, las cuales pueden elaborar durante la charla idealmente en español o en inglés. Mi trabajo será también ayudarlos a traducir lo mejor que pueda sus preguntas. Y claro, lo que podemos ofrecer de momento es la pronta, no inmediata traducción de la respuesta, ya que en honor al tiempo y la extensión de lo que pueden llegar a ser las preguntas y respuestas, debemos utilizar el tiempo que disponemos con elocuencia. Nuevamente, muchas gracias. Me paso al inglés. Espero que disfruten lo que hemos preparado. Well, Scott, I was giving a brief introduction about the lecture. I'm sure you're going to blow our minds. I really appreciate your enthusiasm. Thank you very much for being here with us. So feel comfortable. Remember, we are among friends, so it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Javier. I hope everyone is healthy and well. I'm in the comfort of my home here in the United States in Chicago. I want to thank you, Javier, especially for all your efforts you have put in to this lecture over the last few weeks. It's been my great pleasure to be here today to talk about the urban design and our design impact that we can have on the urban design. But first, a little about me. I grew up in a rural area of Iowa. I studied architecture at Iowa State University. I then moved to Boston, where I was a designer at Choi Kobus and Associates. After a few years, I moved to the big city of New York, and I was associate principal at KPF. And we'll see some of the work that I accomplished there at KPF. I then relocated to Chicago to be closer to family, and was a studio head and associate director of technical design at SOM. So I feel like I have a well-rounded experience with design, urban planning that these firms do, and also the technical side of it. I am now currently a project director at Wight and Company in Chicago, focusing on education and other large and complex projects. I've worked on over 40 projects of all types, including mixed use, educational, healthcare, office, residential, and retail. The project locations have been quite diverse as well, including 10 countries and over 30 cities. You'll notice I don't have any red dots in South America yet, but I have visited several times, and I hope to get the opportunity to work in Chile sometime in the near future. Many of the projects are quite large, and some are rather small. In total, I've designed over 4.7 million square meters of space throughout the world. And now today's presentation, Los bajos de los altos, the lowest of the highest. Today we're going to talk about the lowest of the highest. So what is the lowest of the highest? In regards to a building, it refers to the spaces typically at the base of the building that people and pedestrians occupy and view. One of the first things that we can do when considering the design of the lower levels is to assess the ground plane. So first, let's define the ground plane. The ground plane is considered the horizontal surface at the base of the project. This is sometimes referred to as site grade or the ground level. We will also include in this discussion how people view and interact with the spaces associated with the ground plane. This will include things like the shape of the building, the materials used, and the spaces created by that building. And why is the ground plane important? 2 reasons. Number 1, the ground plane is where the majority of the people will experience the building. It's where most people enter the building and the spaces that pedestrians walk next to. And number 2, the ground plane typically provides the quickest and the easiest access for people, vehicles, and things. For this reason, the following programs are ideally located on the ground plane: the entrance lobbies, the drop-off and pickup, bars and restaurants, shopping and retail, parking, and deliveries, garbage, and building services. All of these things want to be at the base of the building, and they're all competing for that space. So what do we need to think about when designing the ground plane? Here are 5 strategies that I've used: active, non-active, natural variation, simulated, and minimal. And we'll go through each of these in more detail now. In urban environments, active ground planes are often desirable as they provide convenience and comfort to the users. For an active ground plane to be successful, it should feel inviting to the pedestrian and allow for easy views and movement throughout. So how do we make an active ground plane? Here are 5 techniques that I use to make an active ground plane. The first technique is rather obvious. If you can provide an active program that has a lot of people who are active, then you'll have an active ground plane. For example, programs like restaurants, bars, shopping, exercising, performance spaces, all these will create a more active ground plane, and ideally should be placed at the base of the building. The second active technique is transparency. This helps people to see the active programs and also provides a sense of depth within your project. The third active technique is to create pedestrian-friendly spaces. You can do this by providing seating, shade, and scale elements to help people feel more comfortable in the space. And the fourth technique is to activate the ground plane, is to utilize specialty lighting. Creative uses of light can be easy and effective way to provide variation and manipulation of the conditions to help them feel more dramatic. I do have a word of caution though. Be thoughtful and minimal when possible with lighting. Too much light or variation color can be distracting. The fifth technique is to utilize movement to create a sense of activity. Many things can create movement. They don't have to physically move, they can be stationary. The shape of the building could simulate movement. Actual elements of the building can physically move. For example, operable shades, flickering pieces of metal. All these things can create a sense of motion. Utilizing nature can also create harmonious movement. Examples include the movement of trees, plants in the wind, and also natural or man-made movement of water. Now I'm going to go through a project example that utilizes these techniques to provide an active ground plane. This is a project I worked on while at KPF. Our team had already won a competition to design an iconic 556-meter tower in this specific location. We then got asked to look at creating an active mall next to that tower. And I'll walk through how we went through the design process of that space. To start, we looked at the ground plane. It was a flat site with an iconic tower already centrally located on the west side. The roads on the north and west were extremely busy with vehicle traffic. There were 8 lanes of traffic and thousands of people traveled on these roads each day. A large lake existed on the south side. Understanding that thousands of people would enter and exit the tower each day, we created a comfortable plaza that protected them from the busy traffic. By wrapping the tower with active program like restaurants, bars, and boutique shopping. Our client also wanted a large movie complex, so we utilized it at a destination opposite the tower on the far end of the site. And then we infilled the space with traditional retail spaces that thrive on internal circulation. A lot of retail malls like this like to be internal, and so we created functional paths through the building that would connect the two programs. I want to take a moment to look at some of the techniques and details that were developed based on these site conditions. Active programs like bars, restaurants, and specialty shopping created a dynamic space directly adjacent to the tower. We utilized transparent walls with shading devices to create depth within the building. And we provided large sculptures to help create a sense of scale. It was a big space with a tall tower next to it. So we put trees and other art that was large in its own right, but small relative to the other things, and helped people feel more at scale. Lush trees and vegetations provided ample shade and natural movement throughout the plaza. Now, the north and the west sides of the building did not have as much pedestrian traffic. This project was in Seoul, Korea, and was accessed via a large train system directly to the tower. So most people would come to the site via the train and get out within the plaza. So on the north side and the west side, there weren't many pedestrians, but there were a lot of cars. So we increased the scale of architectural features to relate to the experience of the people in the vehicles instead of people on the sidewalks. Large gathering spaces on the interior, like performance venues and circulation space, were strategically placed throughout the building. These active spaces were expressed on the exterior as transparent nodes. Specialty lighting and screening elements were utilized to brand the building and to create a dynamic facade where other non-active facades would have been. For example, the theater space needed to have opaque exteriors. Here we provided interactive lights that showcased the current movies. Therefore, it would change daily, throughout the day sometimes. Other retail locations incorporated signage and branding to indicate the program. Transparent glass was once again used at entrances and gathering spaces to indicate communal spaces. And now Javier will summarize in Spanish what the active ground plane method is.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Bueno, para recapitular, mis intervenciones puntuales acá van a ser el aporte del tipo de traducción. Scott abarca este tema de estrategia de diseño para los primeros niveles, haciendo una explicación, digamos, que es activo o inactivo, variante natural o simulado, e impacto mínimo. Hace una referencia también a qué variables se deben pensar cuando diseñamos los primeros niveles, o el llamado plano horizontal, este ground plane que él menciona. Scott menciona que en un contexto urbano estos planos horizontales, o primeros niveles, mejor dicho, son deseables. Y para que funcionen adecuadamente se debe pensar de modo que inviten a las personas a desplazarse con libertad por el espacio, que tengan vista hacia los elementos y los objetos. Describe también varias técnicas de cómo trabajar frente a un proyecto considerando un programa activo y funcional. El primero de ellos se llama programa activo, suena bastante obvio. Activa mediante el uso concurrido, ya sea con restaurantes, bares, tiendas, algo relacionado al deporte, etc. Todo esto va a aportar un primer nivel conectividad. Un segundo punto es transparencia, que contribuye a ver precisamente el programa que un edificio puede ofrecer, o incluso otorgar una sensación de profundidad o un interior que se pueda mostrar. El tercer punto hace referencia a qué tan amable puede ser con el peatón. Esto significa crear espacios amigables mediante áreas para sentarse, sombra, diferencias de nivel, etc. En definitiva, elementos que contribuyen a que la gente se sienta más a gusto en el espacio. El cuarto punto es la iluminación, la cual es un elemento interesante a analizar, porque puede aportar un efecto más dramático, puede contribuir a dar una sensación de edificio más activo. Sin embargo, se debe ser cuidadoso, ya que el exceso de iluminación o la variabilidad exagerada puede decantar en distracción. Por último, el movimiento, tanto de una fachada literalmente móvil, como simular el movimiento de alguna manera, donde las formas naturales o referencias a formas naturales pueden contribuir a generar un efecto de armonía con el proyecto. End of intervention. Now you can continue, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Javier. Okay, now we'll talk about the second ground plane method that I like to use for addressing the ground plane. This is the non-active ground plane, and it's characterized by opaque, non-descriptive walls, visual unappealing spaces and programs that do not facilitate active use by people. In an urban environment, this is usually a bad thing and should be avoided because they can make the spaces feel uncomfortable, intimidating, or undesirable. Now, in non-urban spaces, these can be used quite effectively and can also be effectively used in urban spaces, but in general, we like to have active spaces. So if non-active spaces are not desired, why do they occur? There are many reasons why spaces become non-active. Let's look at some common causes, and then we'll discuss some ways to address them. One common cause of non-active ground planes is above-grade parking. These spaces do not typically have a lot of pedestrian interaction, and common building materials for parking garages are not always visually appealing. Some programs desire to have opaque walls for either visual and/or acoustic privacy. For example, some government buildings, hospitals, retail, manufacturing, storage, and other service spaces require non-transparent walls. Mechanical systems may require large air louvers. Service and trash areas might be unsightly, and some jurisdictions require large electrical rooms at grade level. Security requirements may also require blast-resistant materials or other mechanisms that are not always the most appealing. And lack of shade, seating, or amenities can make spaces uncomfortable for people to be in. So those are the common reasons why non-active ground planes happen. Now let's talk about some techniques to improve those non-active ground planes. The first technique is rather obvious. If you can move the non-active program and replace it with more active program, then do it. That's always a good thing. For example, can parking be moved to another location on the site or placed below grade? Can a utility room be placed on an upper level or a lower level? Can a louver be installed in the roof or in a soffit instead of a wall? If so, do it. If the non-active program cannot be moved, then try to wrap it with an active program. For example, can you move the program inboard on site and provide active programs like cafes or public circulation at the perimeter. This is often done in large malls where they have a large requirement for parking. And if you can move the parking to the middle of a site and wrap the site with retail like restaurants and boutique shopping, then that would be effective. In this example, the non-active program was set inboard and the circulation space was added. You can see in the photo the orange box. Those were non-active spaces. And that orange box was set back a few meters, and there was a zone of circulation and air that was lit for expression's sake. Sometimes non-active programs simply need a more dynamic material or a screening element to cover it. For example, the parking garage on the left utilizes translucent panels instead of concrete slabs. The project in the middle uses metal screens to cover a program that did not want a lot of transparency. And the project on the right uses vegetation to cover an otherwise opaque wall. The next technique is to use light, transparency, or graphics to manipulate the condition. Subtle uses of these elements can create intrigue and a sense of depth. In retail, facades are strategically branded to portray internal experiences. It's quite common in retail function. And if none of the previous techniques are viable, then it might be best to divert people's attention from it. For example, gasoline pumps are typically not the most beautiful thing to see. But if you put a brightly colored canopy over it, then people don't even notice the gas pumps below it. And now I'll show you a project example utilizing these techniques. This is a project that I once again worked on at KPF, and is for a new medical hospital in Singapore. First, I'll show you our design process for assessing the ground plane conditions. This is a section diagram of a traditional medical hospital. It typically consists of several non-active floors at the ground plane for things like medical surgery, labs, and other procedures. It also includes small waiting spaces for patients. And multiple floors above filled with beds where the patients recover. Sometimes they're there for a day, sometimes they're there for a couple days or a couple weeks. And for this project, we also had a requirement to design a large amount of vehicle traffic. So as you can see, large portions of the project were non-active and not particularly friendly to the patient experience. To address this, we decided to raise the non-active elements up off the ground and provide more space on the ground level for active functions. This helped us to create space so that we can move the vehicle traffic away from the lobbies and replace it with a large park that could be seen and used by the patients. This also allowed for the taller waiting areas, and there was some shaded space under the building for recreation and relaxation by both the patients and also the general public in the neighborhood. We then covered the non-active portions of the building with a metal screen that offered protection from the harsh sun that is common in Singapore, and it helped to create a dynamic facade across the whole building. Here is an image of the entrance that we created under the elevated mass, and an image of light and airy reception area at the ground level. Gracious open stairs lead you to the upper levels of the hospital, and a series of external waiting areas are set in garden-like settings throughout the project. And now Javier will summarize in Spanish the non-active ground plane method.
Okay, thanks. Bueno, en este punto, Scott hace referencia a una estrategia acorde a los primeros niveles inactivos, algo que es una problemática, pero se ofrecen ciertas soluciones. o ciertas técnicas, digamos. Estos son caracterizados por fachadas ciegas o muros, espacios cerrados, programas que no facilitan el uso activo de las personas. Generalmente es considerado como un mal o un problema que debe ser evitado, ya que genera espacios poco amigables, ¿no? Intimidantes o sin actividad. Bueno, ¿qué genera o qué causa estos primeros niveles inactivos? Situarse sobre o detrás de estacionamiento. Estos espacios no son generalmente amigables con los peatones, todos lo sabemos. Nos generan una interacción o tienen materiales que no lo hacen visualmente atractivo o activo, a que inviten a la gente a ingresar al proyecto. Otra razón va de la mano con programas que desean tener una fachada más opaca por razones acústicas, privacidad, digamos, edificios gubernamentales, hospitales, de servicio u otros que no requieren un primer piso translúcido. Otras son las llamadas soluciones como técnicas o elementos necesarios para el funcionamiento de un edificio, que sin embargo cumplen un rol más técnico, ventiladores, etc. Este rol más técnico y funcional que una relación del edificio mismo con las personas. Estos elementos de seguridad también, que requieren materiales resistentes, generan cierros opacos, tupidos, que no dialogan directamente con el público, más bien todo lo contrario. Finalmente, los llamados planos duros, que carecen de sombra o de lugares para sentarse y que vuelven los espacios sumamente incómodos. Y recapitulando, Scott menciona algunas estrategias para solucionar estos problemas que genera un programa inactivo. Una primera técnica puede ser desplazar los programas inactivos y reemplazarlos con programas más activos. Por ejemplo, si existe la posibilidad de desplazarlo, llevarlo a un nivel más abajo, como un subterráneo, por ejemplo. Una segunda estrategia puede ser rodear con programa activo en caso de no poder desplazar el programa por alguna razón de técnica o de uso o la necesidad de que el programa se encuentre ahí. Se puede optar por envolver o rodear con un programa más activo, por ejemplo, mediante un café, un bar, tiendas de algún tipo, en el primero un recinto inactivo, etc. Tercero, mediante un material más dinámico. A veces programas inactivos simplemente necesitan un material más vistoso, móvil, dinámico, y con eso basta para solucionar. Otra manera es mediante el control de la luz, transparencia y señalética para generar una condición de profundidad. Un recurso que se utiliza con frecuencia en el retail, situado estratégicamente una marca o un icono a la vista. Y finalmente, desviar la atención. Siempre y cuando ninguna de las estrategias anteriores sea viable, es preferible minimizar el enfoque que se pueda tener hacia un recinto problemático y guiar la visión y atención de las personas hacia otro elemento. Ejemplos de esto pueden ser mediante forma más dinámica, etc. Your turn, my friend.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're going to talk about the third method, and that is to utilize natural variations in the grade plane. Significant grade changes or other natural features can create fantastic opportunities to optimize the ground plane. We'll look at two specific types of natural variations within a site. First, if a site is sloped more than 4 meters, it might be possible to provide 2 ground planes and therefore maximize the amount of space that have access to grade. And remember, many programs are all trying to be on the ground plane, so having more access is quite beneficial. 2 is going to be better than 1, and in this case, you can try to provide 2. The second type of beneficial natural variation are natural resources like trees and water. Existing natural resources provide priceless opportunities for users to interact with nature and preserve the existing environment. A classic example is falling water, where the river was utilized into the design. And on the left is a project by SOM where they kept nature within the building, and they created pods around trees so that every day the students of the school would walk past and engage with nature even when they were inside. Now I'll show you a project example that utilizes a natural site variation. This is a project I worked on at while at SOM on a high-end hotel in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The program consisted of a luxury boutique hotel, exclusive spa, and a large ballroom facility. The site was very small and naturally sloped down approximately 3 meters on the back side of the project. The program called for a 300-person high-end hotel lobby and an 800-person ballroom. Due to the small site, there was not sufficient space for both drop-offs to be on the same ground plane. So we stacked the programs, one on top of the other. Utilizing the natural site grade, we gave each program its own drop-off. A person would drive down to access the ballroom, and they would drive up to access the hotel. And here's an image of the stacked drop-offs utilizing both ground planes. We were also able to introduce a service entrance on the side of the building so that garbage trucks and deliveries could be made easily without impeding any other traffic with the ballroom drop-off and with the hotel drop-off. And now Javier will summarize in Spanish the types of natural variation we can use to optimize the ground plane.
Ok. Bueno, en este punto Scott hace mención en cambiar alturas de los niveles mediante condiciones naturales, lo cual puede crear una oportunidad para optimizar el nivel de suelo o los primeros niveles de proyecto. Entre los tipos de variaciones naturales del plano horizontal tenemos terreno con pendiente y con múltiples niveles. Con esto explica que si un terreno tiene una diferencia de altura de 4 metros o más, es posible crear dos pisos que interactúan entre sí, maximizar la cantidad de espacio al que pueden tener acceso un mismo recinto. Se puede establecer una diferencia mediante los accesos con esta pendiente. Digamos, es importante destacar que hay muchos programas que es preferible situarlo en los primeros niveles, así que tener una mayor cantidad de acceso puede colaborar. Un segundo punto tiene que ver con el uso de recursos naturales, ya sean árboles, agua u oro, cosa que generalmente es buena idea tomar mano de los elementos que nos entrega un contexto. You can continue now, Scott.
Thanks, Javier. Now we'll talk about the fourth method, and that's to simulate a ground plane. When ideal ground plane conditions are not naturally present, we can artificially adjust where the ground plane is to optimize program needs and user accessibility. We'll now look at 4 benefits of a simulated ground plane. First, a simulated ground plane can provide users easy access to amenities like vegetation and other large spaces. Elevating the ground plane experience puts those amenities closer to the user and utilizes spaces that may otherwise not have been habitated, like a roof. For example, traffic is restricted to the ground level on this image on the right, and recreation areas are elevated and created directly adjacent to living spaces. Elevating a perceived ground plane can also allow a building to float above something like a flood zone and allow for natural ventilation to flow under the building. A classic example of this is the Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe. It was elevated and designed to flood. Unfortunately, the calculations weren't quite right, and it does flood more than the building allows for now, but the concept is still solid. Introducing specialty spaces, typically reserved for the ground plane, at upper levels can also provide opportunities for a unique form. In these 2 examples, large amenity floors are cantilevered at the top of the building. The example on the right is a project I worked on in Dubai called Skyview, in which we elevated all of the amenity programs for the hotel to the top of the building. This allowed us to create a large form and put all of the spa and the pool and exercise rooms directly adjacent to where the hotel people would be staying. and it also created this dynamic building in shape. And the last benefit, setting a building above typical grade can create a sense of grandeur due to the separation from the common pedestrian circulation. Be careful though, as this can have negative perception as well, as sometimes seen with government buildings. Be sure the spaces are gracious and welcoming to pedestrians, even though it may not be on a typical pedestrian path. Now I'll show you a project example utilizing these techniques of simulated ground planes. This is a project I worked on at SOM for a large multi-use development in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The project is called KL Midtown and is 680,000 square meters, located in a new dense development outside the city center. The program consisted of a large office tower, 3 large residential towers, a hotel, a large retail mall, and extensive amounts of above and below grade parking. The project has a clear view to the urban center of Kuala Lumpur, but is situated in an environment with lush vegetation, as most of Malaysia is. For this reason, we decided to integrate as much vegetation into the project as possible via simulated ground planes strategically located adjacent to common gathering spaces throughout the entire project. For example, exterior retail pedestrian ways and streets were simulated at every level with ample shaded seating areas and vegetation. And a large rooftop plaza was created for the residential units. Exterior balconies were provided as sky lobbies to the office tower. And abundant natural light, vegetation, and transparency were used to blur the separation of interior and exterior spaces in Kuala Lumpur. This is a quite common technique there, but can be used many other places. You don't always know if you're inside or outside in these spaces, as they use a lot of natural ventilation, transparency, and vegetation throughout interior and exterior spaces. Here's a section through the hotel showing you so you can help understand the multiple ground planes that we introduced to the project. And this image shows you the overall extent of the podium. Lots of green areas and outdoor space for all of the inhabitants of this building, even though they're in a dense urban environment. And here is an overall image of the project as a whole, incorporating the elements that we originally diagrammed in our initial concept. And now, Javier, can you summarize for us the simulated ground plane method?
Yeah, sure. This is a large-scale project, no?
It's rather large, yes.
Ya. Bueno, este punto, la simulación de los primeros niveles, básicamente se refiere a cuando las condiciones de primeros pisos no se dan de forma natural, se pueden crear de manera artificial, ajustando este plano horizontal o los primeros niveles para optimizar el uso de programas acorde a las necesidades. Esto trae algunos beneficios, tales como acceso conveniente a los llamados amenities que menciona Scott. Estos son programas adicionales como comodidades recurrentes en programas de uso mixto u hoteles, ya sean salas de juegos, salones de baile, de lectura, etc. También respetar elementos naturales, por ejemplo, elevarse del plano original, digamos, permite cambiar la perspectiva y posicionar un proyecto en una condición de posarse, o para resolver bien una problemática técnica. En este caso la casa Farnsworth, como en el ejemplo que podemos ver, sobre pilotes tiene una condición de inundación del terreno, que se resuelve mediante esta técnica. mediante la exploración volumétrica, para generar un efecto más dramático también, siempre y cuando un proyecto requiera de programa exclusivamente reservado para destinar en un primer piso, se pueden generar más y mejores oportunidades, incluso formas únicas y más interesantes, o sea, tiene una implicancia más plástica en el resultado formal de una propuesta. Finalmente, para destacar una posición de relevancia o protagonismo del mismo edificio, se puede establecer un diálogo urbano de un edificio icónico, por ejemplo, o corporativo, o que realmente tiene una condición predominante respecto a su contexto. So, you can continue now.
Okay, thanks. And now we will review the final site grade method. This is to minimize the ground plane. Minimizing the impact of the site, public realm, and contextual relationships provide harmonious results. Here are 3 ways that I recommend maximizing a person's experience by reducing the site impact. Again, the first technique is rather obvious. The smaller the building footprint, the less impact there will be to the site. So more space can be provided to pedestrians, nature, and other elements. One of the most iconic minimal project is the Apple Store in New York City. Here is a highly detailed glass box is the only intervention into the existing plaza. Meanwhile, a large, complex retail store was added below grade. Adjusting the building footprint can reduce impact to pedestrian flow and create outdoor spaces that otherwise would not have been possible. This technique was notably utilized by Norman Foster when he designed the HSBC Tower to be elevated off the ground plane to allow for free flow of pedestrians into the busy city center of Hong Kong. Each week, hundreds of people gather in the opening space to share Sunday afternoon picnics with friends and family. If this building hadn't been raised, thousands of people would have been forced to walk around the block to get to the location that they normally would have gone to. And so he offered this as a service and lifted the entire building up, allowing people to walk under it. And in addition to it, they can utilize the space for gathering, which they quite often do on Sunday afternoons. The final technique for minimizing site impact is to understand and work within the existing scale, form, and materials of the adjacent sites. This can help to develop a holistic and comfortable environment. For the last project example, I'll showcase a project I worked on while at Choi Kobus and Associates in Philadelphia for the University of Philadelphia Health System. It's for a cancer treatment facility and is located next to a large medical complex designed by Raphael Vignoli architects. This type of specialized cancer treatment utilizes charged proton atoms to treat highly accurate radiation. The machine that charges the protons, though, is quite large. It's 10 meters in height and rotates behind the patient. The space requirement for the machine, including the concrete enclosures and roof, are about 17 meters tall. This would have blocked the windows of the adjacent hospital and created a large non-active wall directly adjacent to the sidewalk for pedestrians to walk next to. So we decided to lower the treatment rooms below grade and only expose the top portion, which contained offices and patient spaces, and wanted to be transparent. The result was a minimal, transparent facade that was only about 6 meters above grade. Meanwhile, here's an image that shows the minimal impact to the site and adjacent building while providing extensive services below grade. And now, Javier, if you'd summarize for us, please.
Okay, sure. Bueno, esto nos deja con la última estrategia de diseño para primeros niveles, a través de minimizar el impacto que un proyecto pueda tener. Este es probablemente el más atingente que vamos a abordar como taller. Minimizar el impacto en el sitio permite que el espacio público y el contexto adopten una relación más armónica con un mejor resultado. ¿Cuáles son estas estrategias para minimizar el impacto en el sitio? Bueno, la primera consiste en reducir la huella sobre el primer nivel. Nuevamente, bastante obvia, sin embargo hay que entender que mientras más pequeña la huella del mismo edificio, menos impacto va a tener con su contexto, lo cual es útil para destinar a las personas y al uso público. Aquí Scott nos entrega un ejemplo bastante conocido para revisar, que es la tienda Apple de Nueva York, diseñado por Foster & Partners, la cual consiste en esta pequeña caja cristalada puesta en la plaza, destinando el resto del espacio como área de uso público, mientras que una gran tienda está enterrada. Una segunda estrategia va de la mano con respetar circulaciones y compartiendo distintos espacios. Otro ejemplo de la misma firma de Norman Foster es el Banco de Hong Kong, en el cual este edificio se levanta sobre este nivel público y deja pasar las escaleras respetando circulaciones y actividades debajo del proyecto. Esto genera un efecto sumamente interesante, ya que permite congregar personas bajo esta gran plaza pública, permite a la gente transitar libremente, tener una vida de ocio al aire libre al amparo de este edificio, ¿no? Por último tenemos la condición de adoptar u homologar elementos del contexto. Es otra estrategia que a mí me parece bien relevante si lo llevamos a la temática de nuestros talleres. Tiene que ver con la coherencia y el correcto entendimiento del contexto y diseñar respetando ciertos patrones, variables, formas, atributos, conceptos, altura, etc. So, I'm going to say a few words in Spanish. I think we are almost done with this. Bueno, los invito a, si es que alguno tiene alguna pregunta que quiera realizar Scott. Nosotros hemos estado preparando como bloque taller o nuestra sección un tema a abordar que queremos discutir con Scott. De momento pueden preguntar lo que quieran, en español o en inglés, no tenemos problema con traducir. I was thinking about the topic that we discussed at the beginning, like how we could leave some ideas or topics or strategies, or how we could manage these scale projects on the peripheral the peripheral sites, I mean. Like understanding we are in a city which is not well developed in all those districts, I mean. You can find many differences among the center of Santiago, the most wealth parts of Santiago, and also the peripheral, which is, which has a lack of public space or a lack of public infrastructure. And that's why we decided this semester to work in those areas, trying to bring some of these ideas and concepts or strategies to that part, being rational, being as, I don't know, sensible with the area. That's my point. So if you could share us your thoughts about that, it would be awesome.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can have a full discussion. Here is my contact information. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to talk. We're always interested in having thorough discussions and understanding design concepts, and I'm always available if you need me. I'm going to stop sharing now, and it's a good question, Javier. And I think the most important thing that we can remember when looking at urban situations, especially the base of the building, is under most circumstances designed for people. And that doesn't take a lot of money or a lot of high profile infrastructure to do. It could be easier or nicer sometimes if you have those things. But if we can always keep in mind that the lowest part of the building ideally in urban situations should be for people, for the people using the building and for the people that experience the building, whether they're walking next to it or live next to it. And so if we can keep those in mind, we can use all these same techniques. For example, can you create a space that's comfortable for a person to be in? If there's a lot of sun, can you provide a space that has shade? If there's an opportunity for gathering, even if it's your family, if you could have a space seating or places to eat or places to have recreation like playing sports, those things all help to make a space more dynamic and don't take a lot of money and don't take a lot of infrastructure to do. So I think that if we can keep in mind people, that will help any area. Elements that help that are vegetation, if possible. If there is some type of tree or movement, that does help people to often feel more comfortable. And we can also look at the materials. Materials don't have to be expensive to be nice. We can use them in different ways. A simple material can still create shadow. A simple material can still create texture that allows for some variation that is interesting. And so I think as designers, we have a lot of control over how we put these materials together to create very dynamic spaces that don't have to be expensive. And they can be very easily built as well, as long as we think about it beforehand and don't just accept common spaces should have common solutions. Common spaces can have exceptional solutions, and there are many examples of that out there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that's a matter of responsibility because you have somehow kind of restrictions, your site conditions, and yeah, you should definitely design in order to bring these public spaces, sharing or gathering together with people. I was thinking about your last, or I don't know if it was the last example, the Kuala Lumpur building, which is, it has a giant scale related. If we think like for a while, how we could, I don't know, fit this kind of building inside a, I don't know if a compact city or not even thinking about the peripheral areas, thinking about our peripheria, it's, I don't know, doesn't make sense trying to design that kind of buildings with our conditions. Probably are more related to the center of our city, but it is most related, I don't know, you should take care or you should be cautious about what you are designing with those giant buildings. You should scale them properly, if that makes sense. Also, it is important to understand, I don't know, how it's possible to absorb the negative externalities that these scale projects could create in a compact cities such as Santiago, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Just to start off, I don't recommend projects of that size. They're unique projects that I think have many challenges to them and are not appropriate for most locations, if any. Even the Kuala Lumpur project, we struggled with for a long time at the beginning, the size and density of it. In my opinion, the project is too big. It's too dense.
Yeah.
And all the adjacent sites were also programmed to be that density. And so we worked for a long time with our client to refine the program. We reduced it down some in order to optimize views and spaces. And then we worked closely with them to try to create the best space possible. But frankly, I think that space is too dense. And while I think we did a good job of addressing the challenge, I think it would have been a better space if there was less density. So with that said, there's also sometimes you need density. And so in the spaces that you're referring to, in Santiago, I believe that we need to find that balance between creating density that allows for certain amenities. If you have enough people in an area, you can then create a vibrance. You can then create a need for a supermarket or for a farmer's market or for spaces that children can play because you have that density. So I think that it's up to us to understand how many people are there and how can we find the right balance between how many people there are and providing those people with enough natural spaces and also some of the natural programs that go with them, like supermarkets and recreation and parks. And those are all really important to balancing the urban scale. And I think the techniques, whether they're on a big project, which I showed a lot of, can still be scaled down to smaller. One of the challenges with large projects is the massive amount of infrastructure it needs, sewer system, power, other things that cities may not be able to support. And also traffic. How do people get to these sites and get out of these sites? If you have a good mass transit system, trains and buses, it can be okay. If you don't, then it's a big challenge. And I think we as designers should really question whether it's appropriate if they don't have transportation infrastructure for the project to support it.
Yeah, I think that it's a big issue because we don't have a really good vehicular infrastructure. We have, but it is quite, I don't know, it is a mess. There's a lot of, there's many ways everywhere. I don't think they were well planned. I mean, like, that's an important point, like relate the building or relate the area or that site with this problematic situation near a highway, for example. How you could, I don't know, design that border. Yeah, that's an interesting question for our students, even for us. So it seems like we have some questions. Want to start with some? We have one that came from Diego Vergara. We have been discussing this also. We're going to start with that.
Okay.
How are the creative processes of the office in their preliminary project phases? Client discussion, volumetric or shape exploration, university ideas involvement, brainstorm, workshop, etc.
Sure, that's a good question. It's different in every environment, but I'm happy to say that in every firm that I've worked at, it's been similar. And I think I gravitate towards the environment that they're fostering, and that is extensive amounts of communication. We talk a lot. We don't come with a preconceived idea about materials or about shape or even the end solution. There are some designers that do that, and they're quite successful and quite good. If you could probably know some of these designers that when you hire them, you know the type of building you're going to get. But at Wight and Company, and also at SOM and KPF and TKNA, we always sat down and listened was the very first thing. We listened to the client before we even saw the site sometimes. What do you want? What do you need? What are your problems? What are your challenges? What do you want out of this project? What have you gotten out of your past projects? And we just listen. We then do extensive amounts of research before we even start looking at the design. We understand the site, we go visit it, we talk with neighbors, we look at the history, understanding that many of our projects are not local to us. We usually work with a local designer as well to try to understand the culture and some of the ideas that are present and in the past. Then we look at the program. What does it need? What are they asking for? And oftentimes, we'll start adjusting things based on what we heard both from the client and what we found. And we'll question it. We'll say, is this really what you need? Do you need this much space? Do you maybe need additional space? And after we have those three things done, Then we sit down and we start thinking about the big idea. And usually by that time, something has evolved as a driving factor. It might be, it's oftentimes restrictions. Frankly, a lot of the projects that we work on are complex, and it's based on challenges that we need to overcome. So we'll adjust our designs based on what those challenges are and what we know, and that's when we start to come up with maybe a shape, but usually it's based on working from the inside out for us, and that will create a shape, and then we will massage that shape to understand how it impacts the people and what it looks like. And then we'll start to provide materials or lighting or other things that may drive that as well.
Great. Did you have any kind of bad client or someone who requested different changes all the time, or I don't know if that makes sense to you, like, no, I want it this way right now.
Yeah, well, I will, I don't think there's any bad clients necessarily, and I don't know if there's any great clients either. I take that back. There are some really good clients that we work with. Every client is different, and that's what I really like about it. That's what I like about sitting down with them first, is you'll usually quickly understand what some of their personalities are, but you won't always quickly understand what their needs are. And that takes time. So while we try to understand their personalities quickly, we try to spend a lot of time with them. We'll have meetings with them, but we also talk with them outside of meetings to really understand what's driving their needs. And that helps drive the project. Our process, we're okay with even having changes throughout the process because it evolves, and that's how our designs come about. If we had a preconceived notion at the beginning, it'd be challenging and I think unfortunate if a client said, no, I want something different now. But as we evolve, we find new things out, and we may even say, hey, listen, I think maybe you want something different now. How about this? And I hope that they're open to it, just like we're open to them evolving throughout the process. There's a point where we have to stop designing and really focus on the intent. But at the first parts of the phase, we like the variation.
Yeah, that's great. So we have another question here from Alfonso Gomez. He asked, what roles could the new buildings have in peripheral context and low urban density? Also, what variables of the context have you taken in mind to build the relationship with the neighborhood?
Both good questions. I think the first one, I'll relate back to my initial response, and that is, what roles could the new buildings have in the peripheral context? I think that some of the projects that I showed as examples here weren't as contextual as others. I didn't show the context, and that's really important. I'm glad that somebody brought that up. And as I was putting the presentation together, I thought about putting more context to it, but I didn't want to lose track of the initial discussion. But I don't want to lose track of the importance of it. So the context is extremely important. And in all of these projects, if you step back, we had an entire process. Step 2 in our design process was looking at the site and the program, or sorry, the site and the context. So we did understand the relationship of the adjacent projects, what the views are like down the street. Oftentimes the images I showed were more glamour shots where we didn't show those, but I assure you that we did do renderings of the context and of the adjacent sites. And the big projects that I worked on aren't always within the context of the city. When you have a 556-meter tower, there aren't many of those around, thank goodness. So what we focused on was the retail portions, and did the retail portions have a similar scale to the adjacent sites? And that they did. They were all of the similar height. And I think that the facades were slightly different than the adjacent sites, but being that it was mostly traffic, we felt that it was good to have some variation within that, for the Lotte example. I could show you many of the other 40 projects I looked at that are much more contextual and fit into the urban site. They might be 2 stories, 3 stories, or even 1 story, and that they really are integrated into the urban fabric of the adjacent buildings. So please do look at that as you start your process. The first thing you should do is walk around blocks from your site and understand what's there, why is it there, can it be better, or is it great and we just need to emphasize some of those benefits into our project.
Cool. So you have been here 11 years ago, right? Could you tell us if you find something, I don't know, special or different, or I don't know if bad developed or well developed, or something that you like about our city? I don't know if you have been on periphery of Santiago. I don't think so, but
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your experience walking through the city.
Sure. My experience, one of the wonderful benefits that I loved of Santiago specifically, but also of all of Chile, is the vibrance of the people. You are what creates the city, and you don't need fancy buildings for that. You just need space to inhabit. And if you can create those spaces, it could be some wooden boxes on the corner. And if you can create that as an environment that is inviting, then people of Chile will inhabit it and will make it an exciting space. And that is what's beautiful. I see a lot of restaurants there. I see a lot of activity. People are running and jogging and walking, pets and vegetation, all those things. And if those can be celebrated in all communities, then I think that's the key to some of these other areas. Yeah, I think that's the people, goes back to the people, and you have wonderful people there.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it seems like we have an additional question. Yeah, from a student actually, Matias Vargas. He's asking, how could architecture deal with time and changes, considering that humankind nature is always changing due to external and internal aspects?
Good question. Sure, it is always evolving, and I think that's why we have to keep reusing our spaces. And one of the benefits of design one of the benefits that I see of design today is that it's relatively flexible, where 40, 50 years ago, I think some spaces were typically pretty specific to their program. And now we're creating a lot of more open spaces and more just large spaces that could be used for other things. So it allows for changes in technology, changes in infrastructure, changes in how we work. I can give some examples. Offices. Offices used to be lots of boxes in a row. And now we have open plans where people do sit in more flexible environments. Now that will change with the pandemic and other things, but that allows for these changes. We can sit in groups, we can sit in individual spaces, but I do feel that a lot of spaces now are designed more neutral, and that allows for quicker flexibility. It's also designed with technology in mind. So if we are using specialty lighting, for example, specialty lighting can change fairly quickly. It's not a big fixture, they're relatively economical, and so we can change how a building feels just by the color of it on certain holidays. I think we need to use caution with that, but those are examples of things that we can be flexible with as times change and as people's personalities change in a quick environment.
Right. That leads us to a final question from Paloma, Paloma Sanchez. She asked, what variables in management are transversal to be able to implement projects in countries that are culturally so different?
A lot of countries do have similarities on a fundamental scale. So, for example, a lot of Asian countries on the north are based on Western standards. A lot of Hong Kong, for example, and some of the other India and other countries are based on a lot of European standards. And so we're able, thankfully, a lot of people are, at least as a basis of design, are creating similar standards. Now that's where it stops. Everything beyond that is completely different in every area. And you'll probably find this in Santiago. Santiago is very different than Valparaiso, and different neighborhoods within Santiago are going to have different requirements. So you always have to be diligent working with the local people to find out what the requirements are. And that's true whether you are local or you're not local. We almost always combine with a local design partner because they know these things. They know who to talk to. They know what's appropriate, not just for regulations, but also for the culture and the people. And so we don't just hire them to look at our drawings and consult. They are part of the team. They're there at every discussion. We ask them a lot of questions. They ask us a lot of questions. And in the end, we create a holistic project that is very integrated into the local environment based on this relationship we always create with a local entity.
Cool. So, well, Scott, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. We reached the time, unfortunately. We are very grateful for your time. We hope to welcome you to our campus one day. Let's still keep in touch. I'm looking forward to seeing more interesting projects, such as the ones that you showed us today. Now I'm going to end this lecture in Spanish. Again, thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you.
Bien, esto ha sido todo por hoy. Espero que hayan disfrutado de esta más que charla, una suerte de masterclass. Creo que podemos aprender un montón de proyectos como estos. Si bien están en su mayoría, se habrán dado cuenta, en una escala compleja de abordar, cada vez se vuelve más necesario hacerse preguntas tingentes con estrategias bien ejecutadas como lo que hemos visto, y en cuanto a espacio público se refiere. Así que muchas gracias a todos.